right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Anyone who was with us in the previous sessions, then welcome back. Today is our final session for this series of webinars for the finance assessments. So today we'll be talking about gamified assessments. And just a quick reminder before we begin, this session will be recorded just like all the other sessions, and you will later be able to find it on our website. Okay, so no worries. So let us begin. First, a quick reminder for anybody who is new. My name is Hadassah. I'm a cognitive test developer at Job Test Prep. And my credentials are that I hold a BSc in Neuroscience and Cognition Studies with a minor in Philosophy, and I have extensive expertise in education and content development, and I hope to provide you with expert insight today and help you successfully complete your gamified assessments and eventually land your dream job. Okay, so first of all, what are gamified assessments? So first thing to know is that they are provided by well-known suppliers like Arctic Shores or Aon or Pymetrics, and they are designed to be like games that we know from our day-to-day life. They're fun. They're very different from other assessments. You really are just playing a computer game. So that's a positive part of this. You can actually enjoy yourself while you're being assessed. And why do companies like to use gamified assessments instead of just the traditional type of assessments? Well, one of the major reasons is because it significantly reduces bias. What does that mean? It means that they're building on the fact that they know that you are less likely to understand what they're actually looking for and what they're actually assessing when you're doing the game, because it's very distracting. You're trying to, gain coins or whatever, and you're not really, you're less likely perhaps to recognize what it is that they're actually assessing about you. So therefore, it makes it more honest and real. So what we're going to do today is we're going to actually talk about what's behind the scenes, as well as what's above surface, of course. So the main thing to understand is that they're actually collecting behavioral data on you. They're trying to understand how you behave in certain situations, how you assess situations, and how you perform under pressure. And of course, usually it's not quite what it looks like. There's usually something else going on beneath the surface. So today, we are going to talk about technique development. This will be, it will touch a little bit on how to develop techniques that will work for you. And this will be a surface level discussion, okay? We'll talk about how the games are actually presented and how you need to perform and actually do the games, like play the games in a very basic level. This is important because only if you have your basic technique down, you can then take your time and actually focus on the deeper level things. So next, we'll talk about what's really being assessed and what's really being tested. Okay, that's the juice of today's webinar. We will then talk about aligning with company values. This is something that we talked about in previous sessions. It's extremely important that you do your homework ahead of time and understand how you want to portray yourself and how you want to bring yourself forward, because every company is looking for slightly different values. And they want to see certain behaviors from you so that you will present yourself as a good natural fit for them. And finally, we'll end with some questions if there will be any. So please, I encourage you to ask questions in the chat. It's open for questions. Throughout, it's possible that some other team members will answer your questions. And if there are any unanswered questions or questions that I think everyone can benefit from, then I will present them to everyone and I'll answer them. Okay, so let's begin. Before we start, let's take a quick look at this sequence game. So in a sequence game, you'll be presented with a sequence of stickers. Okay, this is the sticker. Okay, you have to try to remember where the sticker moves. So let's take a look. Okay, Let's do it one more time in case you weren't focused. Try to remember where the sticker moves. Okay, I want you to now try to think how you remembered or how you try to remember as we move on to talk about technique development. So first of all, when we talk about technique development, this is the on the surface part of the test or part of our discussion today. So the first thing you want to understand is what are the rules of the game? Okay, if you don't fully and properly understand what the rules are, you might make mistakes that are very unfortunate, and you might end up showing something about yourself that isn't even true just because you didn't understand the rules. Okay, so we want to really avoid that at all costs. We want to reduce our stress in the actual test day. So a good way of doing that is really familiarizing yourself with the test so that you can then work on your technique and feel calm and confident when you actually play the game on test day. And what this does for us is it lays out the foundation for a deeper understanding and allows us to then focus on the more important parts of the game. Okay, so let's talk about a few types of techniques. So the first thing that I want you to pay attention to is that there are well-known psychological methods of how to play certain games, and for that we have extensive guides in our prep pack. Please, before you start playing or practicing any game, go through our guides thoroughly. There's a lot of really good information in there that will help you then perform much better on each game. Okay, because again, I cannot stress this enough. Just going into the game and playing and thinking that you understand how to play doesn't necessarily mean that you are doing it the correct way or that you are presenting yourself in the way that you want to present yourself. Okay, so in the guides, there's a lot of information. We will touch on some of the information today. I will give you examples from a few different games, but generally speaking, you should know that there's a lot more, meaning there are many more games that we won't talk about today, and there is more information even on the things that we are going to touch on today. So the next thing I want you to focus on is even when we give you different tips of how to solve, I want you to try to think to yourself, okay, how can I just adjust this information to my personal strengths? So I'm going to give you a few examples now of how you might do that. So for example, if we look at the sequence game that we saw earlier, right? And let's look at the sequence again. There are a few ways you might remember the sequence. So first of all, you can use visual thinking. What does that mean? One more time, we'll see the sequence because I want you to really pay attention. Okay, so what you can do is actually draw it out in your mind, right? It started here, it moved to here, it went up and back down. Okay, so you can really try to create that visual in your mind and think, okay, it created some sort of a triangle. That's one way of doing it. If you're a visual thinker, this will probably be very beneficial for you. There are a few other types of thinkings and types of um, methods that you can use. So one of them would be verbal or linguistic thinking. So if you do better when you hear things as opposed to see them, so I might suggest that you actually say the sequence to yourself out loud, like it was left of center, then it moved to the right, and then it went up and then down, and maybe reiterate it to yourself so that you remember. And when you have to actually answer in the game, then you're talking to yourself and that helps you remember. If you're more of a logical thinker, maybe try to find some logical rule here. So in this case, you might think left, right, up, down, okay? And kinesthetic thinking is actually using your body to remember. So in this case, you might actually maybe use your finger and trace the sequence on the screen, and that might be helpful to you. And then you can sort of keep doing that until you have to answer the question. Okay, so let's really get into it. What is the game really testing? So the first thing we need to notice is that we do not want to lapse into game-like behavior. What does that mean? You don't want to fall into your regular game thinking when you're playing your own video games at home and your incentive is to try to make as much money as you can or finish a certain task as quickly as possible. The money and the time constraints can be very distracting, and it often makes you think that that's your actual goal when it's not. Okay, so you really want to try to avoid wanting to just succeed in the actual game, but rather think of what they're really testing and therefore focus on that. So the two major things that we're going to discuss today, and I will say this again and again. This is the most important for finance roles. Is you want to show almost in every game that you're going to be assessed on, you want to show that you can bounce back after failure. Okay, what does this mean? It means that if you have a round in which you failed, you need to show that it doesn't deter you and doesn't discourage you, and you get right back on your feet and you continue and you show that you're still confident, you're still calm, and that you can succeed after you fail. Okay, much more important to show that you can succeed after you failed rather than uh, succeed all the way through. Okay, and the second thing is to showcase good risk versus reward decision making. This is super important, especially in the finance world. We've talked about this as well in previous sessions and our webinars. It's very important that you show that you can perform good risk management and that you can understand when you should take a little bit more of a risk and when you should be a little more cautious. But of course, you don't want to be too cautious and you don't want to be too reckless. Okay, and finally, I will say this one more time. We have guides in the prep pack that really talk about these things as well in depth. So what we're doing today is seeing a few examples, but there's a lot more information in the guides, so please go and look at those. Okay, so let's look at an example from the game Easy or Hard. So how does the game work? Each round, you'll choose between two tasks. Okay, you can either take an easy task or a hard task. And this is how it looks. Okay, you're given a task, and each task has a certain money reward for completing the task successfully. And you are also given the probability of winning on each task. Okay, so in this case, the probability is quite high. Um, and to complete the task, you need to click on the space bar really, really fast and fill up this bar all the way to the top. Okay, an easy task takes less time than a hard task. This is something that we need to keep in mind, okay, because there is a certain limited amount of time for the entirety of the game. So when you take on a hard task, for example, you know that it's going to take you longer than doing an easy task. So now let's talk about what we're really looking at here and what not to fall into. So at first glance, it kind of looks like it's a reaction time task, right? They just want to see how fast you can press the space bar and fill up the bar all the way to the top, but that's not really what they're looking for, okay? This is a much more complex game. So taking a slightly deeper look, it's much more obvious now that what they're really looking for is your ability to assess risk under pressure. So why under pressure? Because you have 5 seconds to decide after you are presented with the probability of winning, your reward for easy and your reward for a hard task. You have to decide which one of the tasks you take on. Okay, now, how do I decide? Well, let's look at some key factors. So the first thing to notice is if your probability of winning is very high, then you say, okay, then automatically I think, let me try for the hard task because I have a high chance of succeeding. However, when you go over and look at the hard task, you then have to compare it to the easy task and understand if the reward that you're getting for doing the hard task is high enough that it's actually worth your time and your effort. Okay? So if it's not a high enough reward, like in this case, even though the probability of winning is pretty high, you might consider just doing the easy task because the hard task you know will take you a lot longer as well, and maybe you should just do two easy tasks and make more money. The other thing to remember is that the easy task is always worth $1, whilst the hard task is worth between $1.24 to $4. So there's a range here and it varies, and you have to recognize whether the reward is high enough or low enough that it changes your decision. Okay, so let's look at an example. You're given this screen. Again, you have exactly 5 seconds to make your decision, and you see that your probability is extremely low of winning. And you take a quick look and you see that the reward for the hard task is also really quite low. The other thing to notice is that in this case, in this example, you've already made some money, okay? So here, it's a pretty simple decision. It's obvious that you should really go for the easy task. There's no point of struggling when you have only 12% chance of uh, succeeding anyway, and the reward isn't high enough. You definitely want to go for the easy task in this case. Let's look at another example. Now you still have the same amount of money in your bank. The reward is much higher though, and your probability of winning is also much higher. This again is actually a very simple decision, because similarly to what was presented earlier, just on the flip side, I have a high probability of winning and my reward is pretty high. I should probably go for it. Okay, so in this case, you should want to go for the hard task. Let's look at some more complicated decisions. So here, the probability of winning is 50%. Okay, not terrible, but not great, right? And in fact, you don't really, it doesn't sway you any which way. So you look at the reward that you might get. And again, the reward for the hard task is really not very high. It's not high enough that it's worth taking a 50% chance of failing. Okay, so in this case, you should definitely go for the easy task. And finally, our last example. Again, the probability is exactly 50%. However, in this case, the reward is a lot higher and you have no money yet. Okay, so you actually have a lot to gain here. So in this case, it's probably better to actually go for the hard task, as the reward is high enough that it's worth the risk. Okay, so what you're doing here is so really what's happening is that how much money you end up with is not really what's most interesting to the assessors. Okay, it's clear that you can decide that your strategy will be to just go for the easy task, go for the easy task, and you'll just build up your dollars and you might end up with a pretty nice sum. However, what you're indicating to the assessors is that you weren't really willing to play the game, is that you were very timid, you were very careful, and you didn't actually engage in the rules of the game. You weren't willing to take any risks, and that does not look good. They don't care that you have a lot of money in the bank. Okay, you didn't play the game with them. So keep that in mind. However, you also do not want to be reckless. Okay, so this is the two sides of the same coin. You don't want to be too conservative. You don't want to be too reckless. Um, keep that in mind. I will also touch again on the fact that you have 5 seconds to answer, or to pick one of the tasks. If you don't answer, it will be randomly selected for you. This is the worst outcome. Okay, you do not want to show that you are indecisive and that they chose for you. This is the worst outcome that you can have, even if you end up succeeding, okay, in the actual task and pressing the space bar fast enough and, filling up the bar and completing the task. It doesn't matter. They are collecting all of the data on how you clicked, your decision, and if you didn't make any decision, it doesn't matter how much money you end up with. It doesn't look good. Okay, so this is what we mean when we say don't look at the surface level of the game, but understand what's really important and what you are saying about yourself and about your ability to handle the pressure and make good decisions under pressure by the clicks that you make and the decisions that you make or lack thereof. Okay. So next, we'll look at another example. This game is called Lengths, and what it does is assesses your ability to test if you can see the difference between the two lines here, the two mouths, okay? So one mouth is longer and one mouth is slightly shorter, Okay, the difference is tiny. This is actually a very, very hard game to play successfully. You're given a series of 90 faces, and you have to assess which one of them has a shorter mouth or a longer mouth each time. Okay, every round you have to press either right or left for shorter or longer. Of course, every time you make a decision, you either have more money added to the bank or less money, or no money at all, rather. Now, on the surface, again, it looks like a reaction time or maybe attention to detail type of task. However, that's not really the case, okay? Because the money that you actually make every round is not necessarily correlated to your success or failure in determining whether the mouth is a short mouth or a long mouth. What they're really looking for is to see if you can be consistent in your decisions, okay? And if you can bounce back after failure. We talked about this already. So our best tip for you on these types of games is to just completely ignore the money reward, okay? Because the money reward doesn't necessarily even tell you accurately if you were right or wrong. What they're looking to see is if you being told that you didn't succeed makes you then lose confidence and start a losing streak, okay? Or like if you kind of show signs that you're giving up. So what you want to do is just ignore the money reward and focus on what you think is right and just keep going, and try to get it right as much as you can. Let's continue. So now we will talk about aligning with company values. Again, this is something that we discussed in previous sessions, as it is very, very important that you do your homework and understand what are the values that the company that you are applying for find the most important so that you can present yourself as a good and natural fit for them. So, what we want you to do is visit the company's official website, okay, and review the job description. And by doing so and understanding what their values are and what they hold near and dear, then say within a game or an assessment, you have some kind of dilemma between two options. We want you to ideally know how to act in a way that aligns with those values. Okay, this is like an extra level to be at. Okay, and of course, you want to demonstrate a tendency for a value and not an extreme. Okay, if any of you were with us in the personality assessment webinar on Monday or Tuesday, um, we talked about this. You don't want to show that you are on an extreme end of any particular value, as that could be to your detriment. So you want to sit comfortably in the center. You want to show that you possess a tendency for it, but nothing too crazy. Okay, let's look at an example. So say we look for Blackstone's core values. Okay, I want you to write down, in your own words, write down the values that you see on their website. Okay, so in this case, you take a close look, you see that they value excellence, integrity, innovation, providing value, and humility and teamwork. Let's look at a game, at an example, money exchange one, and see how you can possibly recognize the values that you might be able to uh, showcase within the game. Okay, and while we do this, I will, of course, also talk about the surface level of the game and what's happening underneath, and how you want to present yourself as best as possible for the finance world. So, the money exchange game works like this: you start the game with a specific amount of money, in this case, it's $10, and you are then matched with a computerized partner. Okay, and the partner has $0. The next thing that you need to do is you need to choose how much money to give them. And you know that this money will be tripled. Okay. So in this case, we see that we gave $5. And so now I know this. Yes, I know that when I give the $5, I'll be left with $5 and my partner will be left with $15. Then the partner decides how much, if any, to return to you. Okay. So when you start playing this game, the rules are explained to you and you know all of this ahead of time. So you are then hoping that your partner will reciprocate and give you some of the money back. And the final step is you then have to rate the fairness of your partner's behavior based on the final amount that you finish with and he finishes with, and how much money he gave you. Okay. And maybe you want to compare it to how much money you gave them to begin with. Now, I want you to take a moment and think of which one of the values that we talked about earlier might be portrayed through this game. So, in order to do that, let's take a minute and think about what's actually happening in this game. So, on the surface, it would seem that, yeah, you should just sort of, you can kind of decide how much money you want to give them. Maybe you don't want to give them money. Maybe you want to give them all of your money because you want to sound super fair and altruistic. Or maybe you want to just play it safe and you don't want to lose money, right? All of these things are valid thoughts. However, there is a correct way to play this game in which you show a good balance between um, risk taking and not being reckless. So, if we look at the example of being very, very safe and keeping the entirety of the $10 to yourself, you could do that. And then you are giving your partner zero money, and the partner can then give you back zero money, and you ensure that you're left with $10 at the end, right? But you also didn't actually engage in the game, right? You can't make more money in playing like this, okay? And this is sort of, maybe you can think of it as slightly playing in the stock exchange. So if you're not willing to take any risk, you also will have no reward. So that's probably not a good strategy to go with. On the flip side, going all in, right, could seem like a good idea because, say, in this case, you give your partner $10, right? And you go, okay, I'm just going to risk it all. And I want to show that I'm extremely trustworthy. And I believe that my partner will play fair. And if I gave them $10 and they then got triple the amount and they had $30, I'm sure that they will then return $15 and I will then have gained another $5. So that works for me, it works for them, and then we're also even. So it seems to be a very fair way to go. However, that's extremely reckless because your partner does not have to give you $15 back, right? Um, or any amount of money back, and it's extremely risky, and you're very likely going to end up with way less than you started with. Okay, so you want to try to find a strategy that's fairly balanced. Okay, now if we look at this and try to understand, what are we demonstrating here? So you're demonstrating generosity, um, teamwork, fairness, and your ability to assess trust. Okay, so these are the different values that are probably portrayed if you play well. So if we look at the list of values that we saw earlier from the Blackstone website, excellence, you can show that you're excellent, meaning that you're striving for success. So you engage in the game, you're not too cautious, you try to do well. And if you succeed in ending up with a little more money than you started with, then you did very well. Integrity, okay, so that means um, giving a nice amount, recognizing if your partner played fair. So the way that you rate their fairness is also very important. You'll show your integrity. And of course, humility and teamwork. So willingness to partake in the exchange and to be fair. Okay, another example, you can look at the JP Morgan website. Again, write down the values for yourself in simpler terms so you can remember, and try to mark any traits that you think you personally possess already, okay, to focus on. In this case, JP Morgan's core values are service orientation, management, integrity, and teamwork. So let's look at the balloon game and see how we can incorporate those um, values. So the purpose of the game is to collect as much money as possible by pumping balloons. Okay, as we can see, you can pump. And Too much pumping will explode the balloon if it reaches its explosion point. Okay, so every balloon has a point at which it will explode. If you pump it enough times and you reach the final pump, it will explode. The pump, of course, increases the balloon size, and for every pump that you make 5 cents. Okay, so um, if you clicked twice and you pumped twice, then you will then have 10 cents. The only way that you can collect the money that you've earned from pumping is if you press collect before you pumped too much and the balloon exploded. If the balloon exploded, even if you have $2 here, it's gone. Okay, so on the surface, the incentive of the game is to collect as much money as possible and have the least number of balloons pop. Okay, so let's try to think, what am I being tested on here and what values I can bring forward. So the first thing to notice is that this game usually involves balloons of different colors or shapes, okay? And each one of them will have a specific explosion probability, and they will be different from one another. Okay, the game essentially assesses your ability to learn and recognize the pattern as you go along. So maybe the yellow balloon pops after many, many pumps, and the blue balloon pops after a decent amount, and the orange balloon pops very quickly. Okay, so while you play the game, you're expected to pick up on this pattern and understand that you should be pumping the yellow balloon more than the orange balloon, for example. Okay, and of course, one of our key factors is the risk taking versus impulsivity. Okay, you need to demonstrate your ability to pump enough and take risks, okay, versus also collecting when it's appropriate to collect. So you don't want to be too risky and too impulsive, because that doesn't look good. It'll kind of look like you didn't really pick up uh, on the pattern. Okay, so you didn't really learn anything while you were playing. That also doesn't look good. On the flip side, once you sort of understand how many pumps you need to pump for per color of balloon, you want to be careful and not stay only on the very safe side. For example, if you pump the yellow balloon 20 times and then it popped, then the next time you pumped 17 times, and it didn't pop. So you don't want to sort of stay only in the 17 or 18 range. You want to also go a little bit above 20, or try to go above 20, because most likely, because it's a probability, it is going to be fairly flexible, and they want to see that you don't get nervous or you don't try to then stay on the safe side. Okay, so this is very important. And again, if we look at the different values, so service orientation, management, in this case risk management, integrity, and teamwork, risk management is what you are showing here by playing the game correctly. Okay, so quick recap. We talked about developing good techniques that are based on your personal strengths. This is something that you need to do on your own. You need to play the games and recognize how you memorize well, or how you think um, quickly on your feet. If there's a way that you can help yourself, okay, pay attention to it and then try to use it to your advantage. We talked about what the tests are really looking to test you on. When it comes to the finance world, again, we're mostly talking about risk versus reward management, and your ability to bounce back from failure. You want to show that you don't get discouraged and that you can keep going. Okay, and finally, we talked about how to adjust to companies' values. This is where you do your own homework. You go onto the website, you understand what's important to them, and try to make sure that wherever you can, you show that you possess the values that they're looking for. Thank you for being with us throughout the webinars, and this concludes our time together. So I was Hadassah. I was very happy to host. I hope that this was insightful and applicable for all of you, and that you will now feel more confident moving forward, preparing for your upcoming assessments. I wish you the best of luck. Good night.